كلية الفقه الحنفي تقدم
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today we start, in this session, we start the discussion of qiyas now. Now look, so far what we have done is we have discussed the Quran, and within the discussion of the Quran as being the source and how to legislate from it, we discussed about 20 ways of analyzing, 20 different ways of analyzing certain words, depending on what they are, and then how to derive rulings from them. And then we discussed some other aspects unique to the Quran. Then after that we studied the Sunnah, and in the Sunnah those 20 aspects of mutlaq, muqayyad, mushkil, etc. all apply in the Sunnah as well. But then we also studied the specific unique features to hadith and its different categorization and typologies, and how strong the evidence is, and so on, how to legislate from there. Then we studied the ijma', and the ijma' was essentially a discussion of something found earlier or not found earlier, and then there's a consensus of everybody on that. Now all of that, I mean, usually usul is a difficult discussion because it's really going into the mechanics of how things work. It's all the underpinnings of the rulings that we ultimately find, right? And jurists are going to be very different from legalists, because legalists are the ones who make up the tools and the procedure and the maxims on how to derive rulings. So obviously it's a much more complicated idea, and it's quite, you can say, abstract idea. And if you don't understand abstraction, then it becomes much more difficult to understand usul. You can only be a good usuli if you're able to get a lot of abstract, if you're able to comprehend a lot of abstract ideas and typologies and categories, and they make some really nuanced differences. And I personally would say that qiyas is where it really comes to bear a lot. I mean, in every one of those you'll see that some points were probably more complicated than others, but qiyas is the one that is very elaborate, right? Now qiyas just means analogy, but it's actually very, very elaborate. There's a very elaborate system of how qiyas works. So that's what we're going to start looking at today, inshallah, of how qiyas works, which is called analogy, and I'll define it for you and explain it for you, inshallah. So we start off with a definition of qiyas. Qasa yaqisu qiyas, an Arabic word, right? And literally speaking, the word qiyas means to determine something, to estimate something, to evaluate something. These are the kind of meanings that you'll get. In Arabic they say qisin na'la bin na'li, like compare this slipper to this slipper. So you got one slipper, make me a similar one to that. So it's almost has a meaning of equation, you could say, as well, to try to find an equivalent of some sort. You're going to see how this plays out. So you can say determine the new slipper that I want, the new garment that I want, according to this one. This is a sample, so do that. So this is a sample, make me one just like it. That's what I want. I want something like that. So you can understand. Now this word qiyas, there's other words that come from there. Miqyas, which means a measure, like a ruler, right? Or anything that measures anything, any instrument or apparatus that measures anything is called a miqyas, because what you're doing is you're showing a certain determination. So that's where this concept of qiyas comes from. So so qiyas means to make something as a sample of the so there's an original case, and then there's going to be usually a secondary case. So the secondary one is undetermined, and you're telling somebody, let's do qiyas on the original one, analogy. We're going to analogize this second case, the new case, the empty case, the fresh case, which doesn't have a determination, according to the original case. And that's exactly where the technical meaning of it comes about. تقدير الفرع بالأصل في الحكم والعلة. So which is to, you can say, to determine the fara. And what I mean by fara here is the new case, the subsidiary case, determine the ruling of that, because we don't have a ruling on that already, according to the original case where we already have a ruling. So let's just say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran or the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam through the hadith have mentioned a ruling about a particular case, and there's another event, another incident, another case where there is no ruling about that because it did not come up in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's empty, it doesn't have a ruling. And then we study it and we find out, hey, this looks exactly the same as this, meaning it's very similar. So we're going to discuss what those similarities are. What would make this similar to this? How do you judge that? What exactly do you look for? Or how does it have to be qualified to be similar to that? Exactly what? Because if it's 100% the same, then those two things are the exact same. Then this would already, so if it's the ruling regarding a very, very particular product, then another instance of that product is the same product. So khamr is khamr. Khamr means wine. So another wine, if it's still considered wine and it's just defined as wine, then it's going to have the same hukum. You don't need to do qiyas there. It's already got a direct command about it from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran as حُرِّمَتْ عَلَيْكُمْ khamr is haram upon you. Right? So it has to be something different but very similar in some aspects, so we'll determine what those similar aspects and characteristics within it are that would justify extending the ruling of the original case to that case, because we need a ruling for the new case because it did not exist before. So that's essentially what that means, and the qiyas itself is a hujjah for us. It's the weakest of the three, by the way. So the Quran, Sunnah and Ijma have much more strength in terms of legislation and undeniability. Qiyas is going to be weaker than that, and of course within Qiyas there's going to be different levels as well. However, where do we get Qiyas from? And just to be brief, Qiyas is established both from Naql and Aql. Naql and Aql, you'll hear these words quite a bit. Naql means Qiyas has been established to us through the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, through examples in the Quran, right, which show that Qiyas is done through the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as well, and of course through a rational need for it. There's an intellectual, rational need for Qiyas, and we can't do without it, because if we did not have that, essentially the idea is that you've got the whole Quran and Sunnah, right? Now, while they provide an extensive range of rulings, right? MashaAllah, it's incredible the amount of rulings that are found in the Quran and all the hadiths and the Sunnah. However, there are many cases, and there are new cases all the time because products are innovated, people do different things, unique issues arise. So we're going to have to find something similar or something general under which this can go. So that's why if we didn't have this opportunity, if we did not have this tool, if we did not have this facility, we would be very restricted in legislation. It would be very restricted in legislation if analogy did not exist. So those who don't agree with qiyas, they're very restricted, to be honest. They're very restricted. But one thing that we have to understand is that qiyas cannot be seen as, when we say legislation, we don't mean that we are innovating a new idea or that we are establishing a new ruling from our side and from ourselves. No. What qiyas is seen as is determining what Allah intends. Keep that in mind. Qiyas is just seen as the determination of what exactly does Allah intend. What does Allah what does Allah intend as the hukum for this? Our job as the mujtahideen and the muftis and the jurists to determine that, and we do that by trying to find what he said about something else, what the Prophet ﷺ said about something else, and then we're trying to find out that if he said that about that, it must be consistent with this, so this must have the same hukum. That's why very important to understand that qiyas is mudhirun lil hukmi la muthbitun, right? La mubdi'un. So qiyas is essentially mudhirun lil hukmi. It's just something that makes it clear, that brings it to the fore, that helps us to unearth it, right? Unravel it, to remove the clouds and display it. it's not one that you establish it afresh, even though that's what it does seem like, right? Because there's a new product, we don't know the hukum of it, right? So when we do a case of analogy and we figure out what the hukum and the ruling of it is, it's almost like we've innovated a hukum. But actually, that is not, that in reality is not the procedure, and it's not what it is. In reality, it is that we've just tried to figure out what Allah would intend and what our shari and legislator would actually intend there. So yeah, you can call that semantics if you want, right? But it's not, there's a real idea there, but ultimately it's going to give us the same hukum, right? It's just that if you do it in the sense that I want to try to find out what Allah wants in there, then there'll be less. And that's what we're told to do as a mujtahid, is that we're not trying to put in any bias in that regard. We're not trying to put any of our own subjectivities in there. We're only going by what we've learnt through our tradition of how this is meant to be done in a very cautious way, because we're trying to determine what Allah wants, and essentially we're signing off on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why qiyas is a very, very sensitive idea, very complicated idea in that sense, right? It's a very, very important idea and very, very significant idea. So there are a number of conditions for qiyas, and we're going to look at it from various different perspectives. There's quite an extensive discussion, inshallah, so we're going to look at it from that perspective. So the points to note here, I'm just going to give us an overall view about this first, right? So we've defined qiyas now, and the elements of qiyas. What are the components that you're going to work with for qiyas? What is the subject matter? So the components you're going to work with, or its arkan of qiyas, remember 4 things, right? And you'll have to keep these in mind all the time, write them down, because it's very important, because they're constantly going to be discussed, because that's what you do qiyas with. So I've already explained to you, you have al-asl, which is also called al-maqis alayh, the thing on which the analogy is made, the original case which already has a ruling, the principal case which already is legislated. We already know, so wine is already legislated, right? Okay, that's al-asl, that's the first component. The second component is al-far', the subsidiary case, the new case, you can say, the unjudged case, right? You can also call that the maqis in qiyas language, which is the thing which you're going to apply the analogy, that you're going to analogize upon, analogize upon is what the original case is. You're going to, the effect of your analogy is going to be seen on this. You're trying to analogize this on the original case. So it's the subsidiary case, right? The unjudged case. Okay. Now, when you do that, what you're essentially doing is you're providing a hukum, right? You're taking the hukum from the original one that, okay, that's wajib, or that's haram, or that's prohibited, or that's obligatory, and you're saying this is this new case is the same as that, so we're going to take that being haram and we're going to apply it to here as well, right? So many intoxicants, we're going to take what we know already about khamr being haram from the Quran, which is direct. We didn't have to do any qiyas for that one. And we're going to say, well, this is the exact same thing, so we're going to take the hurma from here, which means unlawfulness from here, and apply it here. The fourth aspect here, so the first one was the primary case, the second point was the subsidiary new case, the third one is the ruling you take from one and put it to the other, and there's a fourth element that relates to the common factor between them, right, which allows you to extend from the old original case to the new case. What is the common factor? Now that common factor is called illah, right? Illah, that's the effective cause. So we have to determine in the original case, what is the effective cause that makes this unlawful, for example, in wine, right? What makes that unlawful, right? And see if that same case, that same illah, that same, I called it effective cause, is found in the new case, the new scene, the new scenario, the new product. And if that is, then we're going to say, okay, that justifies. So remember, the last two things, the hukum, the effect, the ruling, the judgment, always revolves around the illah. Very important. It revolves around the illah, right? Always, if the illah is found, we're going to say that the same hukm that is in the original case has to then be in the secondary case because the illah is found. The same effective cause is found. That is what necessitates the hukm to be the same. That process you call ratiocination, right? It's a bit of a posh word, but you call that ratiocination, right? It's more like, to give some kind of rational understanding. So it's a ratiocination. You call that process called ratiocination. Right, so that was the arkan and the different components. You've got that now. Now, there are certain conditions. I'm going to mention this. We're going to look at this in a bit more detail later. But the main part here is to understand all the conditions of qiyas. Between the original case, you've understood that now, the asl, and the fara', which means the new case you're trying to legislate on. What is the hukm of this new case? Okay, we found the original case. Let's see if we can do that. What are some of the conditions for that? That's what we're looking at now. Number one. You know the original case, that case cannot be a specific, unique case, right? We'll elaborate on this much later, but to say that if that is a unique case, you can't analogize on that because nothing can be similar to that because that's a unique case. It's a very specific case, very specified, so it can't extend to anything else. It's a unique case, so you can't do qiyas on that. You can't do qiyas on unique cases, right? Because it's a unique case. That's the nature of it. Okay, that's number one. Number two, the second point here is that again, the original case should not have a ruling that has been understood to be non-rational, meaning a very unique ruling. It's not a unique case, but it's a unique ruling which is understood by the jurist to be non-rational. It's one of those what we, I don't want to confuse you right now, but it's called ta'abbudi, where there's a legislation on something that doesn't seem to be rationalizable, right? And it's something that is done against the norm in those things. You'll understand when I give you the examples later. So if it's a specific case like that, that has a unique law to it that is not, you can't find a ratiocination for that, then obviously there's no way that you can extend anything from there to the other one because you can't have a ratiocination there, right? Just understand it like that for now. That's number two. Number three, what we're doing here, the condition is that if the new case already has what we're actually doing here is that we're taking أن يتعدى الحكم الشرعي الثابت بالنص بعينه إلى فرع هو نظيره ولا نص فيه, which basically means that the original case is the one that is mansus. Mansus means that it has been directly legislated to Quran and Sunnah, and the new case cannot be directly legislated, because if the new case is already directly legislated mansus already, then why would you need to do this? It's already got its unique independent ruling already. Why do you need to take from here? That would be silly to say, well, it's got its own ruling, but you know what, I want to extend the ruling of that other case. I like that one, I want to extend that to there, because that's a qiyas is something you do in need, and which means that where there is an absence of a ruling. If there's no absence of a ruling, you can't, it's already got a ruling. That ruling is that you can't cancel out its original legislated ruling from our primary sources of Sharia, because qiyas, remember, is always a lower category than that which is directly legislated in Quran Sunnah, right? The hukm of the asl will always be usually stronger than in the fara', right? Usually speaking, because it's an extension. So you can't extend a lower kind of hukm into something which has already got a direct hukm. It doesn't make sense. So that's a condition that the new one cannot have any direct legislation upon it already. Okay, number fourth condition is, after you do the ratiocination and then you extend the ruling from the original to the new case, it should not, I know you might ask how, but I'm not going to get into that right now. You can't, it can't then lose, the original one can't lose its hukm, its ruling. So the original has to stay the way it is. That can't be affected at all, because remember, you're just borrowing and extending from there. That can't be affected. That cannot be damaged in any way. So بقاء الحكم في الأصل بعد التعليل على ما كان قبله. Essentially, I think what this is, just to give you a bit of a understanding, what this is really trying to say is that you can't come up with some kind of weird ratiocination and illah, right, which you extend, which actually causes the first one to get confusing, right, and confused. So it needs to be, if it's done solidly, then it's not going to affect the first one, right? Okay, the last condition to remember here is similar to this one, but it's just that you can't change the original case in any way. So you have to keep the original case exactly in the same way. None of the wording of it can be changed to facilitate. So let's just say that you're not able to find its ratiocination, so you think, you know what, let me tweak it a bit, the original case, let me tweak it a bit, so then the ratiocination fits and is appropriate and is conducive, so then we can extend that to the second. But otherwise it's just not working out well. You can't do that. As I said, both in the penultimate condition and this condition, that has to stay the same. You can't change it in any way, and after you legislate, it can't become changed. It can't be seen as something else. It can't be affected. We don't want to affect it while we're trying to legislate on a new one. So that's keep that in mind. Right. A few other things to keep in mind when you're going by that middle point that we made, was that the second one doesn't have a hukam on it already, right? Otherwise it's a worthless exercise. So there's a few things. Qiyas can only be considered qiyas if you're trying to extend a hukam shari. So wujub, fard, wajib, mustahab, sunnah, nafil, etc. Right? So the hukam that you're trying to extend is a shari hukam. Because you could do qiyas in many ways, right? So while they may be literally called qiyas, but it won't be the religious qiyas we're talking about. So for example, you can do a grammatical qiyas. That this word looks like this, and this one means similar, so this must be grammatically work in the same way. That's a grammatical case. That's not a religious case. That's for language, right? So qiyas can be used in many things. We use qiyas every day, right? That this particular individual, he's from this particular community, they like hot food. So I know that that's my friend. However, I'm inviting somebody new who's also from that same ethnicity and background. So I'm going to do qiyas and think, if this guy likes chili, then I better cook chili for this person. Or rather, if I'm a chili kind of person, right, and our family cooks with chili, and I've invited somebody from a new person who I don't know too much about, but I know he's from the ethnicity who don't like too much chili. So then I'm going to do qiyas and I'm going to say, okay, well, I better not do that. We do this every day. We do that in products and all sorts of things. So qiyas we do all the time. This is talking about doing it under very particular measures for religious rulings, not for just everyday cases, because that is just what humans do anyway. It's what we're talking about here is the religious ruling one. And another thing is that the hukm itself that the original one had, that should be able to be extended to the second one without any change, without any alteration. It must be that hukm that you're extending to the other one, right? Not something else. You must be extending the hukm itself without change. Hurma, hurma. Fard, fard. And, okay, another one which is obvious is that the cases must match. So the original case and the new case must match and be equivalent. You know, not match doesn't mean that they must be exactly the same, right? If we're saying they have to be exactly the same, that wouldn't make much sense, because then if they're exactly the same, that means they're the same product, the same idea, same event, right? So they match in terms of the illah and in terms of the major features. They can't be so vastly different. If they're so vastly different, and then there can't be any similarity. You can't analogize on something that is completely different in its major features. So كون الفرع نظير للأصل لا أدون منه, it has to be equivalent. So you can't be of a lower level to that, to the original. And as we said before, عدم وجود النص في الفرع, you can't have any legislation already. It can't be legislated. The new case can't already have a legislation, because if it has a legislation, then what are you doing, right? You don't need to add anything to that, right? So I think that explains all of those things. Those are the major conditions, and we'll start looking at this more deeply now, inshallah, since that you've understood the overall mechanics of this, the dynamics of this, the purpose of it, right? And as I said, without this, we would be really struggling, because we don't have direct legislation from Quran and Sunnah directly on many of these things. So, clarify a few more things. You know, the original hukum, that must already have been established either through the first three sources, either through Quran, through the Sunnah, or through Ijma'. And this new case is not legislated at all, because it didn't exist. It's a new case, for example. So that's why we do that. Now, qiyas, as you can see how useful it is, subhanallah. You know, there are so many rulings based on qiyas, and we'd be really suffering if that was not the case. So that's why it's an absolute godsend. And that's why the ulama say that أن القياس أصل عظيم عظيم الشأن جليل القدر. Like, it's very important, very significant, very noble endeavor. And ulama say له دور كبير. It has a major it's been a major influence, and it has a major role to play in legislation. Without that, we'd be stuck on a lot of cases. And that's why this is considered to be the fourth after the Kitab, Sunnah and Ijma', though it's lesser than those, but it's very, very useful. Just because it's the last one does not make it less significant in any sense, right? Because again, we need it. So usually for a jurist, qiyas is where it's like their market, right? It's their place where they can figure things out. Because without qiyas, we'd be stuck, because we'd say, hey, it's not found in Quran, it's not found in Sunnah, it's not in Ijma', what do? We just throw our hands up. What are we going to do about it, right? So we're going to judge the cases, we're going to look at it from that perspective. We've already discussed what it means and everything like that, and what we're going to look at now is the actual provability of it from the Quran, Sunnah, etc. So let's look at that quickly. Number one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاعْتَبِرُوا يَا أُولِي الْأَبْصَارِ. So Allah is telling us to consider, O people of insight, O people of vision, you need to consider these things, right? You need to consider. So this is taken as a basic proof for the permissibility of considering things like that. So this ayah is from Surah Al-Hashr. It's actually the second verse of Surah Al-Hashr. And i'tibar, the idea of i'tibar is to consider the hukum in something that is already established in something and established somewhere else. So that's how the jurists have taken it, that this is what it means. And you can get an understanding and a dalil for qiyas from this. Okay, another verse, Surah An-Nisa, verse 59, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَإِن تَنَازَعْتُمْ فِي شَيْءٍ فَرُدُّوهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَالرَّسُولِ. If you have a conflict about something, and you argue about something, you have a difference of opinion about something, then return it to Allah and His Messenger. That's exactly the point of qiyas. I mean, what else are you going to do? That's the point of how you do qiyas, right? So you would only differ in something if the hukum of it wasn't clear. If it was already evident and manifest, then there's no need to differ. So it can only come into play when there's a kind of an obscure ruling, right? So the idea there is that return it back to Allah and His Messenger, so that you can go by something clearer and then apply that to something that is, because this is a timeless verse. It's not only relating to the time of the Prophet ﷺ, but obviously for us today, that's the way we would look at it. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says in another verse, وَلَوْ رَدُّوهُ إِلَى الرَّسُولِ, that had they returned this and gone back and referenced this to Allah and إِلَى الرَّسُولِ, to the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, وَإِلَى أُولِي الْأَمْرِ مِنْهُمْ, and to the people in authority among them, meaning the people who've got this understanding, لَعَلِمَهُ الَّذِينَ يَسْتَنْبِطُونَهُ مِنْهُمْ, then those who have the ability to infer, they would have got an understanding of this. So clearly you can understand that we're being told to go back to certain references within the Quran and Sunnah so that we can do the qiyas. And that second verse is from Surah An-Nisa, verse 83. Right, the third one is a lot more clearer. This is where the Prophet ﷺ says to Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiyallahu anhu, when he was sending him to Yemen, he says, Bima taqdi ya Mu'adh, how are you going to legislate? How are you going to judge and adjudicate? Ya Mu'adh. He said, with the book of Allah. Prophet ﷺ said, if you don't find it in the book of Allah, then he said, well, with the sunnah of Allah's messenger. So those are if he found clear rulings in the kitab or in the sunnah of the messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then the Prophet asked that, what about if you don't find it therein? He said, ajtahidu fihi ra'i. I'm going to endeavor to produce my own opinion in this regard, qualified opinion. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam loved this, and he said that all praises to Allah who has guided the messenger of his messenger with something that with that which his messenger is satisfied with. So he's given Mu'adh an understanding which the Prophet ﷺ himself would have been satisfied with. Now if obviously qiyas was not a possibility and not an option, Prophet ﷺ would never have been satisfied like that, but he would have rejected it. Okay, a real life scenario now, right? Umar radiallahu anhu, he says, one day you can say, succumbed while I was fasting, and I kissed my wife. So I succumbed to my desire, and I kissed my wife while I was fasting. Then I came to the Prophet ﷺ, I said, today I've done something very serious. I've committed a very, very serious act. I kissed while I was fasting. The Prophet ﷺ, look at the way he responded to him. He said, what do you think if you had, while you're fasting, if you had rinsed your mouth out while you're fasting? So taken some water in your mouth, swirled it around, and then taken the water out and not ingested any, right? So Umar again said, well, there's nothing wrong with that. So the Prophet ﷺ said, then why are you worried? Fafima, then what's the issue here? The Prophet ﷺ is showing him qiyas essentially. He's saying that, look, the case of where in wudu, even in fasting, when we wash our mouth out, we've just been told not to gargle, right? Because gargling risks the water going down, but just rinsing the mouth out is fine. And that doesn't break. So he's saying the same thing that if you were to kiss, he wasn't telling him that it was bad to kiss. That wasn't the discussion there, right? About whether it was bad or not. It was whether it broke the fast or not. That was the Prophet was focused on that. So he said that kissing without any kind of discharge, without it reaching a climax or something like that, is a similar, very similar. That's a new case. It's being legislated according to a case of washing the mouth out. So as you can see, that's the Prophet ﷺ himself doing a qiyas. And of course, anything that he does as a qiyas becomes a sunnah anyway, right? So that's what's special about the Prophet. But the methodology that he's using is giving us the understanding of this. Right, another one is Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. He is asked about the kalala, right? I'm not going to go into this, but Allah, there's a kalala which is mentioned in the Quran regarding inheritance, right? So Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu didn't have the proper answer for it, in the sense that there was nothing revealed that he could get a direct answer for. So what he said is, إِنِّي سَأَقُولُ فِيهَا بِرَأْيِي. I'm going to make a statement about it. I'm going to judge it based on my opinion. And then he made it very clear that this is speculative, in the sense that he said that if it's correct, then it's from Allah. Allah has enabled me. And if it's mistake, then it's from me and the shaitan. So he's giving his disclaimer. And then he basically mentions that it's so-and-so. Umar radiallahu anh says, when Umar radiallahu anh then became the Khalif, right, he did not want to change that opinion. He says that I am absolutely, I'm ashamed in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I would reject and change something now that Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu had said. Subhanallah, right? I had a lot of respect for him and his opinion. So again, that was an ijtihad and qiyas done by Abu Bakr Siddiq. So to conclude today's lesson, I'm going to give us two more backings for this, right? The previous hadith that we just read, that's mentioned in of Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu's opinion on Kalala, that's in Sunan al-Darimi and Bayhaqi in his Kabir. And the one before that from Umar radiallahu anhu, And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that's related in Sunan Kubra of Nasa'i and Sahih ibn Khuzaymah, if you want to check it out there. Okay, the next one is from the next one is from Umar. Actually, it was Umar radiallahu anhu, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu's letter that he wrote to Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiallahu anhu, who had also been sent out to Yemen, if I remember correctly. It was Yemen as well, and he had provided him some guidance of how to legislate. He said, "Al-fahm, fima yakhtalij fi sadrik, mimma lam yablugka fi al-Qur'an wa sunnah." Try to gain an understanding. Try to gain an understanding in anything that causes some kind of confusion in your heart among those things that have not yet reached you from the Quran and Sunnah, or that have not reached you from the Quran and Sunnah rather. So anything that is not found clearly in the Quran and Sunnah, then you try to make an understanding of it. Yeah, you try to comprehend it yourself, meaning come up with an opinion about it. And then he carried on, he said, فَتَعَرَّفِ الْأَمْثَالِ وَالْأَشْبَاهِ. Try to find like cases, similar cases, equivalent cases, so that you can then transfer one to the other. ثُمَّ قِسِ الْأُمُورَ عِنْدَ ذَلِكَ. Very clearly. Then you will analogize the matters according to that. Once you've found things that could be similar, that's what we do. You know, when people ask us questions, we try to find something accurate, something specific in the books of fiqh. If not, then we try to find something similar that the ulama said this there. Right, today, that's what we have as well. Then he says, وَأْمِدْ إِلَىٰ أَحَبِّهَا إِلَى اللَّهِ وَأَشْبَهَهَا فِي مَا تَرَى. Right? And then go and seek out and choose that which is most beloved, that you think is most beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Remember, you're trying to find out what Allah is saying. And that which is most resembling of that which you think is correct. Right? And finally, the last one is from Ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu. He says that anybody who is faced with a situation where he has to judge after today, he should judge according to that which is found in the Book of Allah. And if there's a matter that's not found in the Book of Allah, then he should judge based on what the Prophet ﷺ judged by. If he cannot find it there as well, neither in the Kitab, neither in the Sunnah, then he should judge based on what the Salihin and the righteous people have judged before him. And if there's something that is not found in any of those sources, then فَلْيَجْتَهِدْ رَأْيَهُ. He should endeavor to get an opinion. He shouldn't keep saying, I fear. He says, because ultimately halal is clear, haram is clear, but there are doubtful, confusing matters in between. And then he gave an opinion. He said, he gave a very good guidance. Says, just leave alone that which causes doubt to that which does not give you doubt. So inshallah, that ends our session for today. We'll carry on with the further discussion on this next session, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.